you, even when they called me that, I'm like, I don't know what to do about that. But it just made me feel bad because I didn't want to hurt somebody else. I didn't want to become those things that people were saying. And here's the thing is that it got worse. Name calling got worse when I got saved. When I received Jesus into my life, it got worse, and it came from people closer to me. When I was probably just a couple weeks in, and I was so excited about God, what God was doing in my life. I went out and got a Bible and started reading it. And the pastor told me it was a love story. And I was like, really? Because I just thought it was a book of rules. So that's going to be interesting. But I was so excited about it. And my mom called me a self-righteous little, And we've always fought. My mom and I, she's a fighter, and I would fight back. And then when I got into a relationship with Jesus, I didn't know how to react to that. I didn't know what to do, but it deeply hurt me because that's the last thing that I want to do. I'm not saying that I'm better than anyone. She called me holier than thou. You're just holier than thou. And I was like, I'm not holier than anybody. The whole reason I need Jesus is because I know I was lost, but it just ticked her off. And my friends were confused. They were like, why don't you want to come to the party on Friday night? And I was like, because it doesn't seem fun. And they're like, what's wrong with you? Are you a religious freak now? And I was like, maybe. I don't know. It just didn't sound, I know that when I did try, because they were my group friends, and I went to a party, and I was like, they're like, here, have a beer. And I was like, I don't want one. They're like, what's wrong with you? I'm like, I don't know. But it just doesn't seem fun anymore to get half out of my head and make out with guys I don't know. And we're just going to trust that for now. We're just going to trust that for now. And then really realize soon that I needed new friends. I needed new friends. And they thought I was a religious freak, and I was okay with that. But the truth is that we are all called names. And we've got labels that others have put on us. And of course, the worst ones are when somebody calls you a name that you already believe is true. And that's because the names that other people called me paled in comparison to the names I called myself. The things I labeled myself with: not good enough, unseen, unloved. Why does it hurt so much when somebody calls you a name? When they accuse you of something that you don't feel is true and you feel like you can't defend yourself? But why does it mark us so much, especially as children? This is what they say. They say that psychologists say that the reason that name calling is so painful to children is that it alters a children's world on the inside. It alters their inner world because now their self-concept is changed by somebody else's self-concept of them. And that's what we do as children. We look to the people around us to tell us who we are. And when they start telling us things like you're bossy, you're mean, or like this stupid boy when I was 17 who said that I was ugly without makeup. And God used him to get me saved because he's the one I went to church with to prove him a liar. He was a liar, so I don't know why it took me so long to get over that fact. I'm not ugly without makeup. Makeup's just fun. They also say that the root of name calling stems from insecurities, displaced aggression, a need to dominate, and almost is always correlated with unresolved emotional issues. How interesting is it? And isn't that the truth? But it's so interesting that the person that calls us the name aren't calling us the name because of us, but because of them. If we could just figure that out earlier, because we take those names, we put them on, we wear them, we internalize them, and then you start to live out of them. And I did. I'm sure my mom called me worse names before I got saved, and I called her worse names back. But I was in a wild place before, and afterwards, it was a brand new place. As we grow, our names become an integral part of our self-concept. Our names contribute to our sense of self-esteem, self-worth, and self-identity, shaping how we view ourselves and how we want to be seen by others. Names are important. We're known by it. Our relationships, you know what kind of relationship you have with someone by what name you call them and how you call them. Names are powerful. You sign your name to legal documents, marriage, ownership, divorce. It is your legal name, and that name holds power. Names are important, and they're important in the story of God. Today we're going to talk about a story in the Old Testament. It's the ancient story of Hosea. And the reason we're going back to the Old Testament is because it impacts us today, because it is where the origin of our verse comes from for beloved. Romans 9:25 is that I will call the unloved and make them beloved. And this verse actually comes right in the middle of Hosea, which is this old, crazy story 5,000 years ago. And yet, because of that story, I understand the power of that little snippet of truth. That God says, I will call the unloved and make them beloved. And so I want to take you to that story. I'm going to tell it to you. If you want to read the story, I encourage you to. It's crazy. It's a mess. It is a hot mess, and Israel was in a hot mess. This is ancient Israel. The whole kingdom was divided, and it was Israel and Judah. They had two different kings. They were going after each other. They were trying to survive, and worst of all, they'd forgotten who they were. They'd forgotten where their name Israel came from, wrestling with God. That was Jacob to Israel. They forgot that they had a destiny, and they just took on and started worshiping all the other gods that were around them. And they kind of become so hard-hearted to God. They had betrayed him. And Hosea is really this picture of God being betrayed by adultery, because that's how it felt to him. You are worshiping other gods, and you are made to worship me. And and often God talks about his relationship with his people like a marriage. In fact, we are called the bride of Christ. It is an intimate, powerful relationship that we were made for. And it came through Israel. It came through Judah. It came through the Jews. And here we see them. And this is Hosea. He's a prophet of God. And this is his story. His family, he married a prostitute or a promiscuous woman. And when I think about that, the story starts really boldly with the Lord. When the Lord began to speak through Hosea, he said to him, go marry a promiscuous woman. And he used Hosea's life as a word picture for Israel and for us. But sometimes I wonder, because, their whole, I don't know, maybe you read it and you're like, that was my marriage. That I married the wrong man and he was crazy and we got back together and we broke up like 5 times and God used it and then God is not using it anymore. That's this crazy story. But Gomer was who he married. Her name was Gomer. And we've got the 3 main characters in this story are Hosea, God, and Gomer. And when you look at the words, because names are important, and in the Bible, what the person is named is a part of their story. So whenever you're reading the Bible, if you want to go back to the Hebrew, you want to go back to the Greek and see what their name means, it's going to floor you because you go down just a little bit deeper. So we've got Hosea who says, listen, I want you to marry Gomer, knowing that she will probably betray you, knowing that she will go off. And whether it's for money or whether it's because she's wounded, he doesn't give us a why. He just says, this is who it is. But I want you to hear these names because the Lord is Jehovah in this book, and it means the existing one, the eternal one, the immutable one. And that word immutable means that it is unchanging over time, unable to change. It is in Hebrews 8 where we read that Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And the reason that brings me so much peace, so much hope, is that I change all the time. And the people in my life change all the time. Like they're good one day and they're bad the next. We have a great relationship, especially with my family. We do not have a great relationship. To know that God doesn't change means I can depend on him. To be who he says he is, to do what he says he will do, and to know that I have security in the immutable God who does not change. And Jesus described as a father and whose essence is love. Names are important. Hosea means salvation. It is a form of Yeshua, which is Jesus. It is a foreshadowing of Jesus. And then Gomer, which means complete. And how true is it that even when our names mean something, that Gomer was complete, God created her complete. God created her to be whole, but she was born into a broken world and kept going outside her home to find completeness. She was broken and looking, and that's what we do. This is humanity. We keep looking outside of the God who made us to find the completeness that we can only get through him. What does your name mean? Her name means completeness. So in Hosea 1:6-8, it gives us a quick view of her children. We have Gomer conceived, so they got married. Oh, I jumped ahead. So he married Gomer, daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. And then the Lord said to Hosea, call him Jezreel, because I will soon punish the house of Jehu for the massacre at Jezreel. And I will put an end to the kingdom of Israel. In that day, I will break Israel's bow in the valley of Jezreel. And Assyria had destroyed Israel, and they had come, and they had, and Israel had struck back by beheading 70 people. And they were not living God's call for their life. And he said, you call him this, Jezreel. And then she had a second child. It said Gomer conceived again and gave birth to a daughter. And then the Lord said to Hosea, call her Lo Ruhamah, which means not loved. Can you imagine being named not loved? Some of you can. Because it doesn't matter what they named you, that's what you felt. You felt that you were not loved. And he says, for I will no longer show love to Israel, that I should at all forgive them. Yet I will show love to Judah. I will save them, not by bow, nor by sword or battle, or by horses or horsemen, but I, the Lord, will save them. After she weaned Lo Ruhamah, Gomer had another son. Then the Lord said, call him Lo Ami, which means not my people, for you are not my people, and I am not your God. So she's got 3 kids. And these 3 kids are born in a dysfunctional, messy family. And the first one, it says that she got married and bore him a son. And after that, it doesn't say that. These other 2 children are probably from other lovers, or from when she got money for it. Or maybe she was worshiping and it was a temple thing, because they had temple prostitutes all over the place. But these 2 children, the Lord said, these are yours. They're in your family, but they're not yours. And so you're going to call the girl not loved, and you're going to call the boy not my people, but there's a yet. The next verse says this. The next verse in verse 10 says, yet the Israelites will be like the sand on the seashore, which cannot be measured or counted. And in that place where it is said to them, you are not my people, they will be called the children of the living God. And the people of Judah and the people of Israel will come together. They will appoint one leader, and they will come out of the land, for great will the day be of Jezreel. So it's a story of betrayal and redemption. It is a story of brokenness and coming back together for wholeness. It is a promise that God says is that you can't save yourself, I'm going to save you. I'm going to do it, not by a war, not by man's might, not through horses, not through chariots. I, the Lord, am going to do that. This whole thing is setting up who Jesus is. And it was more than just for Israel, more than for Judah. It was for all of us. And so we see this is what the children's name mean, because they were living in a dysfunctional relationship. Jezreel means scattered. Lo Ruhamah means not loved, and Lo Ami means not my people. But it is not just the horrid way that they were born into the world, but it is what God was going to do in them and through them, that he would accept them even though they're not his. And the Apostle Paul used Hosea as an example of why the Gentiles are included in Jesus' message. That it's not just for the Jews, because God promised 5,000 years before in Hosea that those who are not my people will be called my people. Those who are not loved, they will be called loved. They will be rescued. They will be reconciled. So what happens in Hosea is that yet. God's not done with you yet. God's not done with me yet. Isn't that good news? He's not done yet. And scattered becomes gathered. not loved becomes beloved, and not mine becomes all of mine. In Hosea 2:23, it says this, I will show my love, this is God promising to us, I will show my love to the one called not my loved one. I will say to those who are not my people, you are my people. I will say, you are my God. They will say, you are my God. When you receive Jesus into your life, he gives you a new name. He gives you a new identity. It's something bigger than a name, and yet a name is pretty big. Because that is how we create our identity. And it's identity that is all the way from childhood up. Because in Christ, you are his beloved. That is the name he gives you. You are forever renamed in Christ. You are beloved. And the Bible talks about name changes. And it talks about it in like this relationship with God in so many ways to help you understand what the process is. Because there are three ways that we see name changes. The first thing is that it's new birth. And Jesus said in John 3:3, you must be born again. Well, what happens when you're born? You get the name of the family, whether you like it or not. So if you are born again in Jesus, you receive his whole name, his inheritance. You are born into a new family. And then he says, Paul talks about you're adopted. The relationship that you have with God is that you are legally adopted. And did you know that you can disown your natural children, but if you legally adopt someone, you cannot disown them? They are yours forever. They are legal heirs to the full inheritance. And so Paul says, this is your relationship with God, that you have a new family and you are legally adopted. So you're born into it and you're legally adopted. Well, let's give you one more example of a name change, and that is when you get married. The church of Jesus is called the bride of Christ. And what happened when I got married is I went from Hanson to Grosso, and I have been Grosso longer than I was ever Hanson. You get a new name and a new family culture. And this is that relationship with God. Why is it so important? It's important because the core foundation of this whole ministry is in the truth of this, and it's Romans. I want to read Romans 9:25 through 27. Hosea put it well. This is Paul. He said, I'll call nobodies and make them somebodies. I'll call the unloved and make them beloved. In the place where they yelled out, you are nobody, they're calling you God's living children. Isaiah maintained the same emphasis. If each grain of sand on the seashore were numbered and the sum labeled as the chosen of God, they'd be numbers still, not names. Salvation comes by personal selection. God doesn't count us. He calls us by name. Do you know that God knows your name, calls you by name, wants to have a relationship with you and change your name? Change the name that other people called you. Change the names that you call yourself. Not good enough, not worthy of love. If I could just do better. Rejected, abandoned, those are names. Those are labels. That God says, I have a new name for you, and it is loved. You are my daughter, a part of a family, and now you have an inheritance. I call you by name. Who you are is not what others say about you, not what your circumstances say about you, not what you say about you. Who you are is what God says about you. That's why getting into this is so important. That's why the soap that you do during the week, I want to encourage you to do it, because this is what changes you from the inside out. You know that there are wounds that only heal from the inside out? It is the emotional and spiritual and mental wounds that you are carrying. They heal from the inside out. He starts on the inside and he moves out. And he wants to heal those things and heal your identity so that you can fully walk in confidence and the courageous mission that he has for you. You are his daughter. You are beloved. It says, I will call them. I will call the unloved. I love that too, because do you know God's pursuing you? I believe you do, because you're here. He's been drawing you. He's been calling you. I know that I know what so-and-so said about you. I know what your own mother said about you. I know that your dad said nothing to you, but it marked you with the label of rejected. I know, and I am going to call you, draw you, pursue you, and then heal you. Because who you are is not what anybody else says, it's who I say. I say, you're my daughter. You're my beloved daughter. It was earlier this year that I was writing, and I have a journal on my phone. It's called Meet Me Here. And it is just meet me wherever I am, God. I just need a moment with you. And I was getting ready for Beloved. I was sitting in my car, and I was struggling because God was healing some wounds from my mom, healing some wounds from my dad. And from my dad, it was things I didn't get. And from my mom, it was what I got. And I was looking back, and he brings me back to these moments because he wants to heal them, not because he wants to hurt me. But I'm always challenged because then I'm like, oh, and then when he starts healing it, and he goes, you got this from your mom, but you don't need it anymore. You didn't get this from your dad, but I can give it to you. And I'm like, well, who am I? Who am I? It's just when I think I know who I am, I'm like, oh, hi, look at you. I didn't know that wound was there. It makes sense. And this is what he said. So I asked him, the Meet Me Here is I'm in the car, held, before Beloved begins. I'm answering your question. Who am I? This was during the Ephesians Bible study. Who am I? I wrote down, I'm my mother's daughter. I'm my father's daughter. I am Abba's daughter. And I heard this. You are mine. Before your first breath and after your last, mine. Loved, never lost, never unseen, never left. I'm with you in the middle of the mess. I'm with you in the middle of the madness. I'm with you in the beginning, the middle, and the end. As you walked to school when you were 7 years old, as you moved to a new place every few years, as you ran away from home and ran into me at 17, you are blessed, loved, and held since then. And now, we have these Beloved necklaces and Beloved bracelets and keychains, and we're doing it. The reason we create them is because they're identity pieces. They're identity reminders that it does take a long time for the old identities to get out of us and the new identity to get into us. Because God is not, he's not going to zap you into being completely healed, which I really wish he'd do. But he walks with you, and he works with you, and he works his grace into you, and he works the pain out of you, and you are a beloved daughter of God. And over and over and over again, I have come to the place where I go, when I forget, when I faced a wound that feels like it's going to be a tidal wave in my life, and that lie and that name comes up, you will never be good enough for God to love you. I touched my necklace. I go, oh no, I'm beloved. I am a daughter of God. I am his more than I'm anybody else's. And I have an eternity with him. I'm beloved, and it helps that tidal wave come down. And the longer I walk with God, the longer I'm walking in my new identity, my new name. No matter what anybody else has called you, God calls you his beloved. So we have a tradition that when God nudges you to give your beloved necklace to someone who needs it, you do. And so I'm going to give this beloved necklace to somebody who needs to know that they are beloved by God. And then I'll buy another one, and I'll give that one away too. So if you will indulge me a moment and pray I don't trip down the chairs. This is for you, my friend. You are a beloved daughter of God. God sees you, knows you, and he has a beautiful future for you. So don't you dare give up.